So what are the signs that a system, despite appearances, is in fact an abusive system, a spiritually abusive system? Well, there are various, and we can see them at various points in the Bible. For example, in a spiritually abusive system, there will be an emphasis, a strong emphasis on the status and the power of the leader. And that leader will spend a lot of time and energy trying to maintain that status and power. So, for example, in 1 Samuel 18, that records how the then king, Saul, felt threatened by David's achievements. His resentment reached boiling point when in 1 Samuel 18 verse 7, he heard the people singing this song as they were coming back from a conquest one time. Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. And we read in verse 8 that Saul was very angry. This refrain galled him. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands? What more can he get but the kingdom? Now, an abusive leader needs to have his or her power recognised and his or her authority obeyed. It's a need within them. They spend a lot of time and energy posturing and manoeuvring in order that people will recognise their authority and submit to it. They're eager to place people under them in terms of hierarchy, and that's one way of spotting whether they're operating in their own authority or in God's. They want people under them, but they don't like people rising up or even exceeding them. Then, in a spiritually abusive system, there's a preoccupation with performance. I mean, people are made to feel guilty if certain targets aren't met or certain aspirations haven't been lived up to. They're made to feel as if they've failed somehow. So church attendance and financial giving, those are two popular ways of measuring performance. Evangelism becomes a guilt-ridden exercise rather than something that's joyful and a free will thing. And indeed, financial giving has the free will element completely taken out of it. Again, guilt and manipulation are used to ensure that financial targets are met. Now, in their way of thinking, such leaders, in their way of thinking, the end justifies the means. Serving the Lord and serving the leader becomes synonymous. If this is what the leader wants, then we're in rebellion to the Lord if we don't meet that need, meet that target. Then a third aspect of a spiritually abusive system is control through unspoken rules. Now, in an abusive system, individuality is frowned upon. There's an underlying rule book that people are expected to adhere to. And in this unwritten rule book that everybody is expected to know about and adhere to, there are such rules as the pastor's sermons are never disagreed with. No one disagrees with what he says from the pulpit. No one questions the elders' decisions. They've been appointed by God, so they must be right. No one admits to having marital problems or being tempted sexually. No one has doubts about their faith. These are the kind of unspoken rules in a spiritually abusive system. Now, these rules are never examined or discussed or brought out into the open at all, because if they were, they'd be exposed for what they are, abusive. They're assumed and they're accepted as the norm. So they have an incredible amount of power. And if anybody begins to question these rules, if anybody says, I have a problem with that, then immediately they become the problem. They're in rebellion. They're rebelling against the unspoken rules, and therefore they're rebelling against God. So they have a spirit of rebellion in them. Another aspect of a spiritually abusive system is paranoia over the possibility of persecution from others. So spiritually abusive systems, they foster fellowship, which is a good thing, and they foster loyalty through those unspoken rules that I was talking about. But such systems also foster a feeling of outsiders not understanding us. So we become quite closed, quite insular, quite secretive because they wouldn't understand us. They'd misunderstand. They're not enlightened like we are. They haven't received the same degree of revelation that God's given to us. So let's avoid them. Let's do that so they don't persecute us. Now, this has got several consequences if this is allowed to prevail. Firstly, it binds people to the group. It takes away their freedom of choice. Secondly, it nurtures people's wounds and prejudices. If I come to this place hurt and rejected, then those feelings about those out there are bolstered and strengthened. Thirdly, it effectively rids us of any form of accountability. Who could we be accountable to? We're the ones with all the revelation. They out there, they're the ones who don't understand us. And so we're only accountable to ourselves now. Or actually, we're only accountable to the leader. Then there's the encouragement of misplaced loyalty. A spiritually abusive system will encourage or even demand loyalty to be displayed towards itself rather than towards Christ. And because the leadership is legalistic, those who follow must be legalistically bound to the leaders. So if a spiritually abusive leader moves from one church to another church, his or her disciples have to follow as well. So leadership projects an attitude of we alone are right, only we are right, effectively binding people to them. Where else can they go? These leaders have the words of life, so they say. Loyalty is often endorsed through fear of retribution. Should a person disagree with the leadership, the silent treatment is meted out to them, or they're shunned by the fellowship as being in rebellion, or even humiliated by having a public confession extracted from them. And then finally, in a spiritually abusive system, there's an air of secrecy, not surprisingly. A spiritually abusive system will operate with an air of secrecy for several reasons. For example, because it's got something to hide. Doctrines or practices that it feels the outside world would condemn. So we portray it as, well, they don't understand our level of revelation, but really it's not in the light because they fear the condemnation. Or because that system wishes to avoid accountability. Or because it's operating out of pride, in that those who are following aren't deserving of an explanation. They're not mature enough to handle the explanation. And certainly those outside the church who might be asking questions, they don't deserve an explanation. No, it's the leaders who've made the decision, and the leaders just say, this is what we're doing, and nobody else gets to find out the reasons why.